The Boston Celtics are about to unlock a strategic weapon that most franchises could never access, and what happens next might reshape how we understand roster construction in 2026. Jayson Tatum's imminent return from his Achilles injury doesn't just add a star player to a team already holding the third seed. It fundamentally alters Boston's negotiating position at the trade deadline in ways that could eliminate the most realistic path for the Detroit Pistons to address their critical weakness. Sam Hauser represents something increasingly rare in the modern NBA. A player who offers championship-caliber shooting on a contract so favorable that it feels like a clerical error. For the Pistons, watching Hauser become unavailable represents the loss of the exact archetype their championship window demands. Detroit's rise to the East's top seed has been built on overwhelming defense and size, but this approach exposes a vulnerability that has historically ended promising seasons. Teams without elite perimeter shooting cannot sustain offensive efficiency in playoff basketball where spacing determines everything. The Pistons know this with unsettling clarity, and they recognize that the market for premium three-point shooters will only contract as the deadline approaches. What separates this situation from typical deadline maneuvering is Boston's psychological positioning. When Tatum returns healthy, the Celtics transform from a team managing an unexpected challenge into a team believing they can run through the entire Eastern Conference. This confidence changes their calculus entirely. The Pistons face an uncomfortable reality that extends beyond Sam Hauser's availability. Boston's refusal to assist a division rival stems from something deeper than typical playoff antipathy. The Celtics have dominated the East for years, and they watched the Pistons ascend during Tatum's absence. Now that stability approaches, Boston's hunger to reassert control becomes almost palpable. They will not trade away valuable rotation pieces to a team positioned to meet them in the playoffs. For Celtics fans, Tatum's comeback represents vindication of an organization's commitment to acquiring premium talent and maintaining depth. The team's ability to sustain excellence without their best player validates the supporting cast. And his return doesn't displace anyone, it amplifies everything already working. The rumor that Boston could pursue Jaren Jackson Jr. seems impossible on paper, yet it reveals something profound about how championship teams think differently about salary structure than everyone else. Here's what most analysis misses. The Celtics didn't simply make tough salary decisions this summer, they created optionality that extends far beyond 2025. With Derek White, Jayson Tatum, and Jaylen Brown consuming $145 million toward the apron threshold in 2026-27. Adding Jackson's $49 million salary next year appears financially suicidal. The luxury tax apron prevents teams from acquiring salary. It prevents them from signing free agents. It handcuffs roster flexibility in ways that feel suffocating. Boston escaped this prison once already, and every credible report suggests they won't voluntarily return. Yet executives around the league are whispering something different than what the public understands. They recognize that Jackson gets moved eventually, but everyone agrees the deadline is the wrong marketplace. This consensus is actually revealing. It means teams are already planning for summer acquisitions, which means they're already allocating resources for a season-long cap architecture that doesn't exist yet. The Celtics have the asset base to operate in this future market while simultaneously competing for a championship in the present moment. Most organizations cannot hold both strategies simultaneously. The Anthony Davis situation with Dallas provides an unexpected lens into Boston's strategic thinking. Davis has played only 29 games in a year since his trade to the Mavericks, yet teams would theoretically still gamble on his injury history for a playoff push. The reluctance to trade for Davis isn't about his talent or playoff ceiling. It's about the brutal mathematics of gambling on a player who might provide 10 meaningful games before another injury cycle begins. Any team acquiring Davis must protect themselves against the scenario where they surrender draft capital and young assets, only to watch him disappear into the injury list for the final month before playoffs. Here's what separates this moment from ordinary trade deadline cycles. The Celtics are using their financial constraints not as limitations, but as advantages. The Boston Celtics are about to make a decision that contradicts everything they learned from their summer salary purge. And the fascinating part is that the math only works if you understand how championship windows operate on timelines that transcend single seasons. Jaren Jackson Jr. represents something far more dangerous to the Eastern Conference than another All-Star acquisition. He represents the Celtics' willingness to sacrifice future flexibility for immediate dominance. And this shift reveals where Boston's organizational confidence actually stands. Most analysis frames Jackson's availability through Memphis's rebuild narrative, assuming the Grizzlies become sellers once Ja Morant exits. What nobody discusses is how the Celtics acquiring Jackson actually accelerates that timeline. Boston's interest doesn't merely signal trade willingness from Memphis. It signals that the Celtics have calculated the exact moment when sacrificing long-term salary architecture becomes irrelevant. If the Celtics truly believe they can win championships during the next 3 seasons, then the $49 million salary Jackson commands in 2026 to 27 stops being a liability and becomes an acceptable cost for dominance. Here's what separates Jackson from the typical big man upgrades. His defensive versatility transforms how opposing offenses can operate against Boston. Derek White already functions as an elite perimeter defender and rim protector, but Jackson's ability to switch onto guards and defend in space creates defensive layers that most teams cannot replicate. What makes this shocking isn't that Boston wants Jackson, it's that they're apparently ready to abandon the financial strategy that caused them to trade players away last summer. The luxury tax apron that handcuffed their options then becomes irrelevant if the Celtics believe their window is finite. Jayson Tatum's injury history introduces urgency that executives don't publicly discuss, but absolutely factor into long-term planning. When your best player approaches his 30s with a significant medical setback in recent memory, the calculus shifts from "let's build flexibility" to "let's win now while we can." Jackson at $35 million becomes a bargain if Boston truly believes the next 3 years represent their championship timeline. The Boston Celtics are being presented with a Robert Williams III reunion that appears catastrophically risky on the surface. Yet the proposal reveals something unexpected about how championship organizations evaluate players whose injury history has permanently distorted their market value. What separates this conversation from typical injury-prone player dismissals involves understanding that Williams represents the exact defensive archetype the modern game has forgotten how to value, and Boston might be the only franchise with enough institutional knowledge to exploit his underpricing. Here's what the narrative obscures. Williams hasn't failed in Portland because he lacks elite skills. He's failed because Portland has no use for his specific defensive capabilities during a rebuild phase. A young team developing talent needs scoring options and roster flexibility far more than elite rim protection. The Trailblazers essentially have a center they don't need in their timeline, which creates an unusual market opportunity. Teams rarely get access to players of Williams's defensive ceiling at expiring contract prices, because those players are usually either locked into long-term deals or playing for contenders who recognize their value. Williams is available precisely because Portland is stuck between rebuild phases and has no use for defensive specialists. The financial structure that makes this viable operates on a timeline nobody fully articulates. At 13, $3 million on an expiring deal, Williams doesn't complicate Boston's salary architecture for 2026-27 in any meaningful way. The Celtics could add him without triggering apron penalties or luxury tax escalations that would haunt them in future years. The deeper shock here involves recognizing that Williams represents market inefficiency at a scale that rarely appears at the trade deadline. Playoff basketball is won by teams with elite rim protection and the ability to recover on shooters simultaneously. Williams provides this in bursts when he's available, which means his production per minute actually rivals players earning 3 times his salary. The market has undervalued him because his injury history creates narrative bias, where everyone assumes he's permanently broken. Portland's situation also creates urgency that benefits the Celtics. The Trailblazers are stuck with Williams on their roster while trying to develop younger centers. Every game Williams plays removes opportunities for youth development, and every injury reinforces that he's no longer part of the rebuild. Portland would likely accept Anthony Simons at full salary just to clear that center spot.